Hello everyone. It seems like a very long time since I last made and posted one of these videos, but I suppose that's because it has been. The last one I made was way back at the beginning of March, not long after I had arrived in Japan to begin my research. At that time, I did intend to make and produce videos while I was in the country, but I found as time wore on that I was just too busy, or too tired when I wasn't busy, to spend time putting material together. I do have a range of videos which I recorded while I was there though, so over the next few months I hope to roll out some interesting content. Of course, if you follow me on Instagram on my @mistwave account, then you will have been able to follow me through my time there via all of the photos that I took. If you don't follow me, then feel free to check out my profile and take a look back at everything that I was doing in the course of my research leave in Japan. But what was it that I did? Well, as I said in the last video, I had a number of aims for my time there. First, and most importantly, was to get hold of a significant amount of literature. When I say literature, I mean that in the academic sense of books and articles written by Japanese academics about the topics which I'm interested in. In order to do that, I was paying regular visits to this place, Waseda University's main library. One of the reasons why I chose Waseda as the place where I wanted to spend my time was because I had visited there before, and so I knew what the contents of their library were like. That is, I knew they had many of the books and articles which I wanted to read. I found myself getting into a routine while I was there, visiting the library, going down into the research stacks which covered 2 floors of the basement, choosing the next 2 or 3 books off my list, getting them out, going back to my accommodation to read them, take notes, and or scan relevant pages. As an aside, I decided relatively quickly that in order to make my research more efficient, I would need to buy myself a reasonably priced scanner in order to digitize the material that I wanted, so that my luggage wouldn't be overburdened with pages and pages of photocopies. In the end, I got this Caesar one, and I can thoroughly recommend it. Of course, the experience of using it isn't quite as smooth and easy as is portrayed in the glossy advertising videos, but it does the job. I didn't choose this one completely at random because I have a slightly earlier model which I've used here in the UK, but I have to say that the improvement in this model, which has a higher definition camera, makes for clearer scans and thus fewer errors during optical character recognition, OCR. As you can perhaps imagine, this is particularly important if you're dealing with Japanese texts, or I suppose texts in any character-based language. In any case, I found having a scanner invaluable, and so now have a large number of digitized versions of extracts and excerpts from various texts, which I can read and annotate on my computer or iPad and then import into my digital notes. That's not to say that everything was entirely high-tech. If you remember in the last video, I said that I'd already started buying some books, and that was something which continued throughout my time in Japan. The purchases varied between some academic monographs, that is, specialised research books, and editions of pre-modern texts, both with and without commentary, which will provide me with resources and keep me busy for years to come, I think. I ended up having to post about 25 kilos of books back to the UK at the end of my trip. I didn't spend all my time at Waseda's library, however. I also paid the odd visit to this place, the National Diet Library, NDL. The Diet is the Japanese Parliament. The Japanese term for this is kokkai, if you're interested. And the NDL exists to serve the needs of the Japanese government in the broadest sense, meaning that it's Japan's copyright library and so has a copy of almost everything ever published in Japan, and also a significant number of historical, rare and valuable texts. Many of these are slowly but surely now being digitized, although sadly from my perspective, many of these are not available outside of Japan or even outside of the library itself. So the only way to access them is to go to the place itself or else be at a library which has reciprocal arrangements with the NDL, which essentially means a major university library in Japan. It wasn't for the books, however, that I went to the NDL, but for the periodicals, that is, articles in academic journals. The NDL has one of the best and most comprehensive collections of Japanese journals, and so it's long been the go-to destination for foreign academics, and Japanese ones too, who want to find almost everything that they need in one place. Like all large institutions, the NDL has its own idiosyncrasies and ways of doing things, but it's an invaluable resource for the scholar. So, one travels on the metro to Kasumigaseki, the government district of Tokyo, exits the station and walks to the NDL. I have a reader's card already, so all I needed to do was leave my stuff in one of the lockers provided, putting anything I wanted to take into the library with me into one of the freely provided, sturdy, transparent plastic bags, and then pass through the barriers into the main building. You're not allowed to take photos inside, of course, so I can't really show you what it's like, but I think it's just like you would imagine a major modern library to be. High ceilings, issue desks, banks of terminals, and scholars of all types hunched over desks with their books. The NDL doesn't have open stacks, so if you want to read anything, you have to order it up for delivery, which involves navigating the cataloguing system. I've always found that it works very efficiently, and you usually get the book or journal you want within about 20 minutes. When I'm there, because what I'm looking for are journal articles, it's a bit of a production line. I order up some journals, take them to be photocopied, go back and order up some more journals, go and collect the photocopies, take the first lot of journals back to the desk, collect the new ones, and repeat. It means there's a lot of trudging about, as the catalogue terminals are on one floor and the photocopying centre is on another. So I certainly get my walking exercise in on those days. Photocopying at the NDL is always something of an adventure. In order to protect the books and journals, you're not allowed to photocopy things for yourself. And in addition, Japanese copyright law is a bit restrictive about how much you can copy of any one thing at any one time. So, what you have to do is go to one of the special photocopying only terminals in the photocopying centre, log in and indicate which of the materials you have out at the moment you want to have copied. The system then prints you off a paper photocopying application form, one for each book or journal that you want to have copied, upon which you have to write the page numbers you want, how many pages that is, and also attest that the reason why you are having the copying done is for your own personal research or scholarly purposes. You then take this form with the materials to the photocopying counter, where one of the helpful assistants will check that you have everything right. You would think that it would be obvious, but I have to tell you that when I first started going to the NDL, I frequently got the page counts wrong. If you do get things wrong, the assistant will kindly correct these for you, tell you what size of paper they will use to copy the materials you want, and tell you approximately how long you have to wait. When I was there, the library wasn't too busy, and the waiting time for photocopies was only about 15 minutes or so, but it can get much longer at busy times. If you want to go off and do something else while you're waiting, that's fine. And there are special terminals dotted around the building where you can check to see whether your orders have been completed. When your photocopying is done, you go and collect it from another counter and pay for it, either in cash or e-money, which you have preloaded onto something like your Pasmo or Suica transport card. It's a bit old school, no credit cards or other form of contactless payment as yet. The NDL is a place where, as a scholar, you can spend the entire day if you really want to. There are even cafes inside, so you can get something to eat. Here you can see my NDL lunch, curry rice with iced coffee. If you can't make it to the library in Tokyo itself, or its branch in the Kansai, that's the west of Japan, then if you already have a reader's card, you can use the grandly titled Remote Photo Duplication Service. That is, you can order up photocopies and have them post them to you. Again, the system is a little bit idiosyncratic and seems in some ways like the remnant of a more civilised age, in that you don't have to pay for your copies in advance. You order them, they do them, and then post them to you wherever you are in the world, accompanied by an invoice for the costs. I have to say, I took advantage of this service for my final lot of photocopies, and they arrived in the UK in good order sometime after I got back here. There's a choice of ways of paying, which again are a bit idiosyncratic. You can make a direct transfer from a Japanese bank account, but this costs more due to bank transfer fees. You can pay by credit card, as long as you write the number down on a form and fax it to them. Or, if you're not sure about doing that, there is an online payment option by which you send them an email giving them the numbers of your invoices, and then they send you a personalised link to an online payment portal where you can then use your credit card. If all that seems a bit complicated for high-tech Japan, well, that's just how it is. I hope this relatively lengthy digression may be useful to anyone who's thinking of visiting the NDL in the future and gives you an idea of what to expect. Now, I understand, of course, that while libraries might be a really exciting topic for a scholar like me, they may not exactly get everyone else's pulses racing. So what else was I doing during my time in Japan? Obviously, I didn't spend all of my time either in libraries or in my room reading material. That would have been a complete waste of the opportunity of actually being in Japan for a lengthy period. Many years ago, when I first spent some research time in Japan, my host gave me the advice that unless you're going to be in the country for more than 6 months, you shouldn't really be trying to write anything, because those first several months will be taken up with getting hold of literature, getting your thoughts in order, experiencing the place, and things like that. She emphasised that I shouldn't feel guilty about not being particularly productive in that sense, as I was only there for a couple of months. This time, however, even though I was only there for 4 months, again, not very long in the grand scheme of things, I did find myself writing, although in a somewhat idiosyncratic way. I seem to be using that word a lot, don't I? What I meant by that is that I didn't write the entirety of one piece and then move on to the next, but instead I found myself writing a number of different things all at the same time. That means that now, at the end of my time, I've completed what I would guess to be about 2 books, composed of 3 separate books and an article, none of which is entirely finished. 2 of them, though, are almost complete, and so my task over the next couple of months is to finish these off and get the article off to a journal and the book manuscript off to a publisher to see whether they're interested in producing it. The article is about attitudes to the use of Sinitic material in waka poetry in the early medieval times, as evidenced by the judgments and comments in the poetry contest in 600 rounds, the Ropyakuban Uta Awase. This is something which has long been in the works for me, and in fact something which I gave a talk about back in 2020 at the University of Southern California when I visited there to publicise the publication of my translation of and commentary on the contest. While I was in Japan this time, I gave a talk on the same topic in Japanese to an audience at Waseda University. This is quite challenging and intimidating, as you can imagine, because while my Japanese is okay for everyday conversation, giving that kind of formal specialised talk is not something which I've done very often. Even if I do say so myself, however, the talk was a great success. One of the Japanese academics in the audience actually came up to me on the street a couple of days later and told me how much she had enjoyed it, and said that while I was speaking, it was just as if Shunzei himself, the judge of the contest, had appeared in the room. I was very flattered by that, as you can imagine, and the general reception among the audience of the ideas which I talked about has given me a bit more confidence that they might be of interest to a wider audience if written down. So, watch this space and we will see what develops. In terms of other activities, I took the opportunity to travel, visiting Kyoto a couple of times and also getting out and about in Tokyo to visit exhibitions, see scenic beauty spots, and also visit places with historical connections which I hadn't visited before. I was also able, to some extent at least, to follow the changing season as different plants came and went. At the beginning of my stay, of course, there were cherry blossom in a wide range of different varieties, and later there were hydrangeas and azaleas. All of these are plants which are mentioned in waka poetry, so I was actually able to see them with my own eyes in the country and, to some extent, the situations and scenes which had stimulated poets to compose so long ago. If you check out my Instagram at Utadokoro or TikTok at Waka Poet, you'll find I produced plenty of plant-related poetry posts over the last few months. Of course, these poems also made their way onto www.wakapoetry.net, so they're available there too. If I have time, I'll put together a couple of short videos on those plants in their poetic contexts for your entertainment and edification. I mentioned that I spent some time visiting exhibitions. If you remember back to my last video, I said that I was going to Toyama in order to see an exhibition about the Hyakunin issue, the collection of 100 poems by 100 poets. I'm going to talk about that in my next video, although sadly, but perhaps not unexpectedly, I don't have any photographs or video of the exhibition itself because it wasn't allowed. Early on in my stay, I was lucky enough to be able to go and see an exhibition at the Yamatane Art Museum in Tokyo, which, interestingly enough, has an apartment building nearby with a full-size replica of the statue of Michelangelo's David out the front. But in any case, the exhibition was of paintings of flowers and mountains, both of which are, of course, important waka topics, and I was certainly able to see some beautiful artworks on waka-related themes. I also picked up this little book, Masterpieces Depicting Cherry Trees and Blossoms from the Yamatane Collection. It's got some lovely pictures, of course, but one of the things I find most interesting about it is that in the accompanying text there are quite a few waka poems included. The writer notes that these poems have been chosen by the staff of the museum itself, and so it's not the case that the poems acted as direct stimuli for the artists producing the pictures. But nevertheless, I think it's a wonderful piece of evidence of the way in which poetry in Japan is intimately connected with image. And this connection has been in existence for centuries, dating all the way back to the Heian period. There's even a subgenre of waka poems called byobu uta, that is, folding screen poems. These are poems which were written specifically in order to accompany paintings, often of seasonal scenes, which were painted on folding screens which were used to decorate aristocratic mansions and palaces. Often, a whole series of these were produced for particularly important ceremonies and events. If you want to know more about this, then I can highly recommend Ed Kamen's book, Waka and Things, Waka as Things, which is available in good bookshops and libraries. The exhibition which I found most personally exciting, however, was held at the Goto Museum on the border of Tokyo and Kawasaki. This is a lovely museum, located a little off the beaten track in a relatively quiet residential neighbourhood, which has a particularly fine collection of Japanese texts and calligraphy. The exhibition I went to see was focused on Japan's first imperial anthology of poetry, the Kokinshu. As this was such a famous text, almost everyone who was anyone tried their hand at copying at least some of its poems over the centuries, which means that there are enormous numbers of Kokinshu poems by a large number of people in a range of styles and from a range of historical periods. Obviously, for calligraphy aficionados, this is a fantastic resource. But the thing that was most exciting for me about this exhibition was that in one of the albums of calligraphic samples which they had on display were a number of poems attributed to poets who took part in the poetry contest in 600 rounds. In the course of translating this work, I feel I got to know the poets' personalities and characters quite well, and so it was moving to see samples of what may have been their actual handwriting. I could look at them and think, yes, that piece was definitely written by so-and-so. It fits the mood of the poetry they produced, and so I was able to feel that I was deepening my connection with those poets, those men who lived 1,000 years ago. Personally, feeling that human connection with the poets that I translate or write about makes me more enthusiastic about doing the work. On a more academic level, seeing that exhibition was a way of bringing home to me the importance of the materiality of Waka poetry. This is something which Ed talks about in his book at greater length and far more eloquently than I can do here. But Waka are not just nebulous words and mental images. They have a close connection with a range of physical objects in Japan, and I don't think it's really possible to understand what they mean in the broader sense unless you think about the ways in which they were written down, what they were written down upon, and how they were physically enjoyed. Talking about that in detail, though, is beyond the scope of this video, a topic for another time perhaps. I didn't spend all my time in Tokyo. As I mentioned earlier, I also made a couple of trips to Kyoto, Japan's ancient capital, and the place where the majority of waka were composed. The main reason why I visited the city was to attend recreations of a famous poetry event, the Kyokusui no En, or Kyokusui no Utage, which translates into English as the Twisting Waters Banquet. I was lucky enough to be able to attend 2 of these events, held at different shrines in the city. The reason why I went was because it was an opportunity to hear poems being formally recited out loud, and both of these were certainly memorable experiences for me. I've written a short post accompanied with pictures about these events, which is up on www.wakapoetry.net, but I took quite a lot of video, and once I have a chance to edit it together and put an appropriate commentary together, I'll post a talk about it. As an aside, what I would really like to do at some point in the future, provided that I can get hold of a sufficient budget, is to get some of the trained reciters out of their comfort zone in Japan and bring them over here to put on some performances for audiences in the UK. What a wonderful thing that would be. Anyway, that's more of a long-term project, but something I intend to work on. That's a brief recap, much condensed, of what I've been doing in Japan over the last 4 months. Of course, I was on research leave for an entire year, and the time has certainly given me an opportunity to try things out, produce content, and plan what I want to do over the next several years, as well as getting hold of at least some of the resources which I'm going to need to carry out those plans. Perhaps one of the most important things that this experience has taught me is which bits of the research process it would be most efficient and effective for me to do myself, and which bits would go faster and be done better, perhaps, if I had an assistant to do them for me. That's not a way of being lazy, of having an assistant do the hard work and just swanning in to take the credit, but a way of taking a step up and thinking about all the various different aspects of what my kind of research is and where, with my current level of skills and experience, I'm best employed. So, for example, it makes sense for me to be reading poetry contests, thinking about the contents, thinking about what they mean, how they're put together, how they all interrelate to each other, and so forth. But it makes less sense for me to be producing lists of poets' names, of topics which were used in different contexts, and producing Excel sheets and databases, for example. There's no doubt I can do that work, but the overall research would go more smoothly and more efficiently, I think, if I was working with someone who did those kinds of tasks for me. What does this mean in practice? Do I have the budget available to me right now to employ someone to help me? Of course, the answer is no. So another part of my future plans will be to reconceive of my research as a project which doesn't just need me to do it. working on my own, but as something with various people involved, and to try and put in some applications to get the budget in order to do it. Whether or not I'll be successful in that, of course, I don't know at this stage. Applications for research funding are always highly competitive, and there are no guarantees. But putting one of those applications together is one of my shorter term priorities. Such is the life of an academic these days. I think that's all I've got to say for now, so I'll finish up. As always, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them below, and I hope there'll be more videos coming out soon. By the way, if you're wondering why I'm standing up to deliver this video, well, the sad fact is that given my advancing age and general state of physical decrepitude, sitting in an airline seat for about 16 hours all told on the flight back from Japan has left me with a sprained hamstring, and so I'm doing much of my work standing up now to stretch it out and get myself recovered. As you can imagine, the fact that I've managed to sprain a major muscle while sitting in a chair is a cause of much schadenfreude and lack of sympathy from certain family members, and I've been enduring pointed remarks about the need to do something about my general physical condition. Hopefully, that's something I'll be able to address over the next few months as well. Finally, this is of course the Waka Poetry channel, and so I don't want to end this video without giving you a poem. I've been doing quite a lot of love poetry lately, and may have more to say about that in the near future. But in the meantime, here's a poem from the poetry contest held by Sadafumi, assistant captain of the Outer Palace Guards, Right Division, on the 8th day of the 4th month, Engi 5. That's the 14th of May 905, which was a Tuesday, as it happens. 久に来ぬ人を待つにや愛ぬらむ時はの恋と我がなりぬるわ He never comes, that man I'm waiting for. Will I ever meet him? Though into everlasting love have I completely fallen. The emotions sound familiar? I think that they do. See you next time.